The quiet of the morning stretched endlessly down the deserted road. The air was still, and the world seemed to pause, as if waiting for something to break the calm. A movement caught the human's attention, slow and uneven, coming from the far side of the road. A dog. The creature moved with a distinct limp, its body dragging slightly with each pained step. Its fur, once thick and healthy, was matted with dirt and blood, clinging to its frame like a heavy cloak. The dog's eyes, wide and clouded with confusion, flickered as it stumbled forward, its body pushing on despite the pain. It wasn't searching for help, not seeking attention. The dog was simply surviving, one step at a time, each more labored than the last. The morning stillness was broken only by the quiet rasp of its breath. The human had been sitting by the roadside for hours, lost in their own thoughts, watching the world unfold in its slow rhythm. They had noticed the gentle rise and fall of the earth around them, the breeze that stirred the grass, the far-off hum of the natural world waking up. But then there was this dog, moving toward them as if guided by some unseen force. The dog paused, its head lowered, muscles trembling from exhaustion. It was still for a moment, its eyes searching the human figure just yards away, as if trying to make sense of the stranger in front of it. There was no fear in its gaze, no aggressive stance, only a quiet, empty stare, as though it had already given up on the world. The dog, weary and broken, was lost in its own confusion, its body too tired to seek out shelter, too hurt to continue much longer. A soft call escaped the human's lips, a whisper, almost inaudible, but in the quiet of the morning, it felt like a bridge between two worlds. The dog's eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition, a sign that the dog wasn't beyond all hope, that it still had the will to trust, even if it was faint. It took a slow, hesitant step forward, its legs trembling with every movement, as if testing the ground beneath it. The air between them seemed to shift, carrying a quiet tension. The dog, unsure, but coming closer all the same. The human remained still. The only movement in their posture a slight lean forward, a gesture of patience. They didn't move to approach, didn't reach out, but simply allowed the dog to come as it needed. This moment, quiet and unspoken, stretched long in the early light. There was no hurry, no pressure, only the shared understanding that the dog was no longer alone in this vast, silent world. It was a small gesture, but it carried all the weight of care, of presence. The dog's steps were slow but steady now, the gap between them narrowing just enough. It didn't need to be coaxed further. The trust had begun to take root, small and fragile, like the first hint of dawn after a long, dark night. The world, still and quiet, held its breath. And in this fragile moment, a fragile bond began to form. The dog was not alone anymore, and the human was no longer just an observer in the silence of the road. The dog lies still on the dirt road, no longer dragging its body with the same urgency as before. Its breathing is shallow now, slow and deliberate, as though it has settled into a quiet, tentative waiting. The pain in its limbs is palpable, but the dog does not protest, does not move. Instead, it simply watches. Its eyes are wide, but there is no longer a desperate flicker in them, only something far more quiet, an acceptance, perhaps, or a surrender to the circumstances. The human moves closer, their feet soft on the earth, careful not to disturb the fragile peace that has settled between them. The air is thick with silence, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the grass. The human's presence is barely a whisper, but the dog still flinches when the soft sound of footsteps reaches its ears. Its body tenses for a brief moment, but it does not flee. There is something more than fear in the dog's movements now, something that lingers in the air, unnoticed but felt. It is the smallest shift, a flicker of trust, perhaps, or simply the recognition that help has arrived, however quietly. The human stops a few feet away, kneeling slowly, their movements measured, every gesture speaking of calmness and care. There is no hurry in their approach, no attempt to rush. They understand that the dog will come in its own time. And so, the human waits, their hand outstretched but not forcing the space. The dog's eyes remain fixed, watching with an alertness that never fully fades, but there is no more wariness in its gaze. It closes its eyes slightly as the human's hand nears, its body trembling faintly under the touch but not recoiling. The dog does not pull away. Instead, its muscles loosen, just enough to allow the human to come closer, the quiet surrender of someone who no longer feels the need to fight. The human moves with the gentleness of someone who knows how fragile this moment is. Their fingers brush lightly over the dog's fur, just enough to gauge the injury. It is deep and severe, a wound that speaks of something more than an accident. Yet, there is hope in the way the dog does not resist, even as it lets out a soft, broken whimper. It is a sound lost in the wind, almost imperceptible, but the dog does not fight against the care. Its ears flick nervously, but there's no attempt to move away, no effort to push the human's hand off. For a moment, the world seems to still again, the dog's trust growing in small, quiet increments, even as the pain still lingers in its body. And the human, sensing that trust, moves just a little slower, a little softer, as though the mere presence of the dog is something sacred. The wound may be deep, but the bond forming between them is already something far more lasting, something that cannot be seen, but can only be felt. The dog's breath steadies, its eyes watching the human as they work, and for a moment the world is quiet, as if both have found something, however small, that gives them hope. The wound has been treated, and the world slows down in the soft silence that follows. The dog, though still in pain, no longer carries the same wild urgency. Its body rests more comfortably now, though the struggle remains in the sharp, shallow breaths it takes. The human sits close by, never forcing the space but remaining present. Their hands, having offered what little healing they could, now rest at their sides, ready to act should the dog need them again. There are no words spoken, for none are necessary. The dog does not seek more than the quiet comfort of another's presence. A cool breeze moves through the trees surrounding them, as if nature itself were offering a quiet blessing. The leaves rustle softly, the air carrying with it the scent of earth and pine. Time, it seems, has stretched into a slower rhythm, and everything in the world exists in this single moment of stillness. The dog shifts slightly, its body sinking deeper into the ground, pressing itself closer to the cool dirt beneath. The earth is solid beneath it, offering support in the way that only the land can. The dog allows its form to rest, its head still raised slightly, eyes open but no longer filled with panic. The immediate threat that once pressed against its body has faded, and for the first time in a long while, the dog simply pauses, no longer fighting, no longer fleeing. Its eyes flicker to the human nearby, watching, wary but no longer desperate. There is a quiet understanding in the way the dog remains, its muscles relaxing as if the weight of the world is no longer pressing down on its frame. Its gaze, still alert, seems to say that while trust has not been fully given, it is beginning to bloom slowly, cautiously. The dog is not yet ready to surrender fully, but it has found peace, however fleeting, in the shared silence. The human watches the dog without rushing to fill the quiet. They do not disturb the calm that has settled between them. For a moment their thoughts drift to the dog's past, to where it had come from, what had led it to this broken, silent road. Was it abandoned, lost, alone for too long? But these questions feel insignificant now. What matters is the bond being formed in this moment, the small trust that grows in silence, not words. The dog, though vulnerable, does not appear afraid. Its body is no longer rigid with tension. Instead, it lies in a soft repose, not entirely at ease, but no longer on guard. The air is still, save for the wind whispering through the trees. The dog's body shifts again, but this time it is a gentle motion, not one of pain, but of settling into rest. Its eyes never fully close, but there is a softness now that wasn't there before. The human remains nearby, their presence a quiet anchor in the midst of the dog's recovery. There are no urgent movements, no rush to fix what is broken. In this moment, the dog is not alone, and for the human, there is no desire to change the stillness that has taken root between them. This fragile moment of peace, of connection, is enough, and so they remain, together, silent, as the world around them breathes and moves in its own time. As the hours passed, the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows that stretched across the land like slow-moving creatures themselves. The air had cooled slightly, the early heat of the day settling into a more serene warmth. There was a sense of quiet transition in the world, the subtle shift between day and night. The human remained by the dog's side, watching with a silent patience that had become almost second nature. The dog, once so restless and fearful, now lay still, its shallow breaths rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to match the heartbeat of the earth itself. The dog stirred suddenly, a soft whimper escaping its throat. It was faint, but it held a certain urgency. The human shifted, their body tense with anticipation, watching closely. The dog had been still for so long, but now there was something different in the way it moved. Something that caught the human's attention. A subtle shift that hinted at a change, something unfolding just beneath the surface. It was as if the dog's body had been waiting for this moment to arrive, and now it was stirring in response. For a moment, the dog's belly twitched, a small, almost imperceptible movement like the tremor of a leaf before it falls. The human's eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of the subtle sign. It was so small, so fleeting, but it was enough to make the human's heart quicken. The dog's eyes, still wide with a quiet alertness, flicked toward the human, seeking reassurance, but there was no fear in its gaze. Only a quiet, uncertain recognition that something was happening, something beyond its understanding. The dog gave a soft cry, a sound that broke the silence like a fragile thread being tugged. It was a sound of discomfort, of distress, yet it carried with it something else, something deeper, something primal. The human leaned closer, but still they remained calm, steadying themselves against the quiet storm of emotion that swelled in their chest. There was no panic in the dog's body, only the steady rhythm of its contractions, each one a silent call for help, each one a signal that something was about to change. Then the first sign of life, a small, fragile form, wet and trembling, emerged from the dog's body. It was a puppy, tiny and vulnerable, its eyes still closed, its body shivering with the shock of new life. The human watched, their breath held in quiet reverence as the puppy was gently born into the world. There was no rushing, no panic, only the steady unfolding of something miraculous. The human's hand remained still at their side, offering comfort in their presence, but never intruding. They watched the dog's body tense with each new contraction, but there was no fear, no frantic energy. Only the slow, steady movement of nature taking its course. The second puppy came shortly after, then a third, and with each one the dog's body seemed to release a little more of its tension, a little more of the exhaustion that had been pulling at its limbs. Each small, fragile body that was brought into the world seemed to bring with it a new wave of calm, a sense of peace that began to settle into the air around them. The human stayed close, but they never interfered. They simply watched, their hearts swelling with something undefinable, a quiet wonder at the fragile beauty of the life unfolding before them. The puppies were small, each one weak and fragile, their bodies trembling as they instinctively sought warmth and comfort. The dog's tired eyes softened as she turned her head toward them, her breath still heavy but steady. She reached out with gentle, careful movements, her body trembling slightly as she gathered her newborn pups close. The human took a small step back, instinctively understanding that this was a moment that needed no words, no interruption. The dog and her pups were creating their own rhythm now, a quiet bond forming between them, unspoken but deep. The world seemed to pause around them, the rustling of the wind in the trees the only sound that broke the stillness. The dog, despite the obvious fatigue in her body, shifted slightly, curling around her pups, her protective instincts already taking hold. Her body still trembled from the effort, but there was no panic. She was not afraid. There was a calm in her now, a resignation to the fact that she had done what she needed to do, and that the world, for the moment, had shifted in her favor. The human continued to observe, their heart full with the quiet beauty of the moment. They did not intrude, did not try to touch or move any closer. They simply let the dog settle into her new role as a mother and watched as she began to nurse her pups, their tiny bodies wriggling toward her in search of sustenance. There was a soft sound in the air, the faint rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of nature in the background. It felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath, watching with reverence as this new family was born in its midst. For a long time, the human did not move. They remained still, not wanting to break the fragile peace that had settled between them all. The dog, no longer alone, no longer burdened by the weight of her suffering, seemed to sink into the moment with a quiet grace. She did not look up. But there was a sense of understanding in her posture, a recognition that this moment, this small family she had created, was enough. The human stood for a while longer, their eyes fixed on the scene before them. They were not in a hurry. There was no need to move, no need to disturb the quiet. They watched as the dog gently licked her pups, their small bodies still wet from birth. They heard the soft sounds of contentment as the puppies began to nurse, their tiny bodies curling instinctively close to their mother's warmth. The dog's body, once trembling with pain and exhaustion, now seemed to relax into the moment, her body giving itself over to the new life she had created. And as the human stepped back, allowing the dog and her pups to settle into the peace they had earned, there was a quiet, gentle understanding between them. No words were necessary. The dog had given birth to new life, and the human had witnessed something miraculous, something small but powerful. It was a bond that would never be broken, the quiet understanding between two creatures who had shared a fragile moment of life together, without words, without urgency, only the simple presence of one another. The sun began to sink lower, the shadows lengthening as the world moved on. But for now, in this small patch of earth, there was nothing more important than the quiet miracle that had unfolded. The wind whispered softly through the trees, the world continuing to spin. But the human knew that this moment would stay with them forever, a soft memory etched into their heart. As the sun began to sink low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, the day was drawing to a close. The warmth of the afternoon had softened into the cool embrace of evening, and the air, once heavy with the heat of midday, was now gentle and refreshing. The road, which had felt so empty and quiet earlier, now seemed to stretch endlessly before the human, who remained still, seated nearby. The dog, though once weary and broken, lay quietly by her newborn pups, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The puppies, still too young to walk, nestled close to their mother, instinctively seeking the warmth of her body. The human had watched the dog for hours, offering a silent presence, the kind of companionship that didn't ask for anything. In the quiet, they had witnessed the fragile beauty of new life being born. The dog, her body still trembling with exhaustion from the birth, had found comfort in the human's stillness. But as the evening stretched on, there was a subtle shift in the air. The dog's movements grew slower, as if the weight of the world was gently lifting from her shoulders. Her body, though still marked by the scars of her injuries, seemed to soften in the light of the setting sun. The pain, though not gone entirely, had dulled. The soft tremors that once racked her body in fear and exhaustion were now replaced with a quiet stillness, a calm acceptance. She had borne her pups, and now, it seemed, she was ready for something else, something that would take her away from this road, away from the safety the human had offered and back to the wild. The puppies, still too small to walk, lay contentedly beside her, curled in a small, fragile bundle of warmth. Their tiny bodies were soft, barely more than skin and bones, but they were alive, breathing, and with each passing minute, growing stronger. They seemed content in their mother's presence, safe in the shelter of her body, but they too sensed something had shifted. The world outside their small circle was no longer a place of fear. Their mother had protected them, brought them into the world. And now it was time for them to grow, to face the world that lay beyond. The dog's eyes shifted from her pups to the human, her gaze soft but steady. There was no more hesitation in her look, no more suspicion or fear. It was as though she had come to understand the human's presence. The human had not forced her, had not rushed her, but instead had offered her the space she needed to heal, to give birth, and to rest. There was no judgment in the human's eyes, only quiet respect. The dog, though still a little cautious, seemed to know that the time had come for her to move on. With slow, deliberate movements, the dog began to rise, her body shifting as she lifted herself from the ground. The lingering pain from her injury still made her movements stiff, but there was a certain strength in the way she stood, steady despite the exhaustion. Her body quivered slightly, but she did not falter. Her head, once held low in fear, was now held high, her eyes scanning the road, the landscape before her. She looked back at her pups for a brief moment, her gaze lingering, as if saying goodbye. They were too young to understand, but in that fleeting glance the dog seemed to acknowledge the responsibility she had carried and the new life she was leaving behind. The human watched quietly as the dog took a step forward, then another, her legs moving with more purpose now. She was no longer the broken creature that had stumbled into their care. She was a mother, strong and steady, walking toward her future, carrying the hope of new life in her wake. Her body, though still marked by the struggle of her past, was moving with grace now, as if the road ahead was calling to her, guiding her back to where she belonged. The puppies, still too weak to walk, stayed close to her side, their tiny bodies still curled against her, instinctively seeking her warmth and comfort. The dog did not hurry, though. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if allowing them time to catch up, to find their place at her side. There was no urgency in her movements, only a quiet certainty. She was not abandoning them, but guiding them. She had given them life, and now she would lead them into the world where they would grow. The human stood silently, their heart heavy but full of quiet gratitude. They had witnessed something incredible, something that had unfolded slowly, quietly, and without fanfare. The bond that had formed between them and the dog was not one of words, but of presence, of shared understanding. The human had cared for her in her time of need, and now, as she took her first steps away from the road, they felt no sorrow, only a deep respect for the creature before them. She was ready to move on, to return to the wild, and the human would let her go. The dog paused for a moment, her body still, as if sensing that this was the moment. She looked back one last time, her gaze meeting the human's for just a heartbeat. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a quiet understanding. In that brief moment, they shared something that could not be captured in words, something that would stay with the human long after the dog had disappeared from view. The wind picked up gently, carrying with it the scent of the wild, the promise of new beginnings. The human remained still, watching as the dog and her pups moved into the distance, the small family disappearing into the landscape. The road was quiet now, the dust settling in the wake of their departure. The human knew that the dog had found what she needed. She had found strength, she had found peace, and now she was moving on. There were no final words, no dramatic farewell. Only the soft rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant sound of the world continuing on. The human took a slow, steady breath, their heart full with a quiet peace. The dog had given them a gift, a moment of tenderness, of hope, of life continuing. And though they would never see her again, the human knew that the bond they had shared, however brief, would remain with them forever. As the light of the day faded, the human turned slowly, making their way back toward the road. The stars began to twinkle softly above, the sky a deepening shade of blue. There was a sense of quiet finality in the moment, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The dog and her pups had moved on, but their memory lingered like the soft glow of the setting sun, gently fading into the night. And in the quiet of the evening, the human carried the weight of that moment with them. A soft, enduring memory of a miracle, and the peace that came with letting go.